If you watch a lot of old college basketball games, you'll notice something odd. It's almost like there's something missing.
There goes Michael Jordan. Hits Brust.
Well, the thing that's missing is the shot clock. Certain NCAA conferences use the shot clock from time to time, but it wasn't really widespread in the game until 1985. And even back then, it was a whopping 45 seconds for a shot. But have you ever thought about why we have the shot clock and why it took so long for the college game to use it? Well, if you watch a lot of really old basketball clips, I'm talking like black and white stuff, you'll notice a few things. So obviously the quality of play was nowhere near what it is today. But the other thing that you'll notice is that one team usually seems completely uninterested in actually playing the game. Stalling was a legitimate tactic that was used in basketball for a long time, for decades actually. The theory was that a weaker team or a slower team or a team that couldn't shoot as well could simply hold on to the ball to try to even things up and to have at least some kind of chance at winning. And yeah, you can imagine how much fun it was to watch that. Now, this strategy became completely ridiculous in the early years of the NBA. The 19-18 Fort Wayne Pistons victory over the Minneapolis Lakers in November 1950 is the stuff of legend these days. In fact, reporting at the time had it that a bunch of kids in the balcony chanted "Hold that line" as if this was a high school football game. The few newspapers that bothered to report on the NBA in those days noted the numerous records that this game set. The new record for fewest combined points in a game, 37, was almost 50 points less than the old record, and both teams only scored 4 field goals each. Now, that one's a pretty extreme example, but it wasn't really all that unique. In fact, there was a legendary game only a few weeks later that proved that something had to be done if the NBA was going to survive. This game was the legendary 6-overtime game between the Indianapolis Olympians and the Rochester Royals in early January 1951. Now, a 6-overtime game should have been something exciting, but this one was not. The team that had the ball in each overtime period simply held on to it, waiting until the final seconds before trying a shot. That backfired in the end, actually. Indianapolis stole the ball from Rochester and made the winning shot with time running out. And as crazy as this sounds, there were entire overtime quarters in that game with no scoring at all. The second and fourth overtime period featured no scoring. Both teams scored 2 points in the first and third periods, and Rochester failed to score in the sixth. This box score is really ugly. Okay, so you go to watch a basketball game, you get all hyped up, you're in the crowd, you're cheering, and then what happens? One team simply passes the ball around midcourt for 10 minutes. That's simply unwatchable, isn't it? Stalling and excessive passing were common, especially if the other team had a height advantage. The game honestly was unwatchable. I mean, even clips of the NBA All-Star Game feel sluggish and boring. It was a stand around and watch kind of game. Well, that's what things were like until sometime in summer 1954, when Danny Biasone and the team he owned, the Syracuse Nationals, started experimenting with the shot clock. Biasone settled on a 24-second shot clock. He figured that the best games he had seen had about 60 shots per team, and he calculated that to be about 120 shots per game combined. When he did the math, he figured that meant about 1 shot every 24 seconds. The NBA started experimenting with the clock in preseason games that season. The results were mostly positive, though it took the players a little while to get used to it. Well, the first regular season game with a shot clock was fast and high scoring, a 98-95 Rochester victory over the Celtics. And interestingly enough, it was broadcast on television. It was a score that would have been among the highest all season the year before. Clearly, the shot clock was a success, and in the end, it stood the test of time. And so you're probably wondering why they didn't just try this out in college right away. Well, from what I can tell, the concern at that time was that the smaller schools that couldn't recruit tall or fast players would be at a massive disadvantage with that kind of restriction. But of course, the lack of a shot clock led to totally ridiculous things. For example, if you found yourself playing against someone like, Will Chamberlain, the only viable strategy was to pass the ball in the front court and literally stall the game out. And then there were coaches like the legendary Dean Smith who came up with schemes designed to stall the game out. This is his four-corner scheme, which honestly doesn't look that much different from the way a lot of modern NBA offenses work. But the big difference today, of course, is the three-point shot. These days, when you're on defense, you have to make the choice between guarding against a three-pointer and risking leaving the lanes open, like what we just saw, or closing up the lanes and worrying about the three-point shot. Well, in those days, the offenses weren't taking long shots and they weren't driving the lane. They were just wasting time dribbling the ball around midcourt. Well, that led to some ridiculous scores like this Tennessee versus Temple game in 1973. No, this isn't a football score. Tennessee beat Temple 11-6 in a basketball game, a full basketball game. And yes, people paid to watch it. I believe this is still the record for the lowest scoring game in NCAA history. It was certainly the most boring. For a 14-minute mark in the second half, Temple held on to the ball without taking a single shot. This must have been extremely frustrating for Tennessee fans who had watched their team score 117 points a few nights earlier. And yeah, you're reading this box score right. Temple scored only 1 point in the second half. 1 point in a whole half, in front of 11,000 fans. This game is so crazy that I really can hardly believe it. This reminds me of things I've read about the real old days of college football. The real old games back in the early 1880s, back before they had a system of downs and one team would just hold the ball for the entire half. I can't imagine why anybody at that time thought that this was good for the game. Well, there were a few changes the next season and there was some experimentation. For example, the Big 8 experimented with a shot clock for a while, and there were a few exhibition games as well featuring shot clocks. The NIT also asked for permission in its 1974 tournament to try out the shot clock. Interestingly, they also asked for permission to let the players dunk. That's right, slam dunks were outlawed in the college game back in those days too. But in the end, it took over another decade for anything to change in the college game, and it wasn't until just about a decade ago, 2015, that the shot clock there went down to 30 seconds. I suspect that we'll eventually see college teams go down to 24 seconds. Now, personally, I can't imagine watching a game or paying to watch a game, especially without the shot clock. It seems really, really boring. But what do you think? How do you think that it's changed the game, and has it changed it for the better or for the worse?